Real stories of werewolves, of dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Werewolf Infestation in our town. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm writing to warn you about a recent dogman infestation in our small Midwestern town. Growing up, I heard tales of the dogman, but I always figured those stories were just old legends meant to scare kids, and that if the dogman were real, they were rare and kept to the deep woods. Now, recent events have forced me to reconsider. I feel a real threat looming over my town, and I hope sharing my story might help others be prepared. I live in a small farming town surrounded by a dense forest. My house is one of the last before the trees take over. The forest has always been a source of mystery and a bit of thrill, with its thick canopy and teeming wildlife. We've always had the usual critters around: deer, raccoon, the occasional bear. But lately things have taken a darker turn. It all started later last year, just as summer was turning into fall. I was out in the yard one evening enjoying the cool breeze and the quiet that comes with dusk. That's when I saw it. A large, dark shape moving swiftly through the trees at the edge of the woods. At first I thought it might be a bear, or a particularly large deer, but something about the way it moved set me on edge. It seemed to glide between the trees with an eerie silence, too graceful for something so big. The sighting was strange, but I brushed it off as trompe-l'oeil, a trick of the fading light. Over the next few weeks, though, I wasn't the only one who saw it. My neighbor, Mr. Johnson, mentioned to me that he saw a shadowy figure moving through the forest while he was checking out his fences at dusk. His encounter was more detailed than mine, and it left him deeply shaken. Mr. Johnson had been inspecting his fence line just as the sun was setting. He noticed movement in his peripheral vision, and he turned to see a tall, shadowy figure about 50 yards away, partially obscured by trees. As he told me about this, I remembered things that other neighbors had told me as well. There was a growing suspicion that our forest was haunted, and it was inhabited by a very large shadow man. In fact, that's what Mr. Johnson told me he first thought he was looking at. However, as he stared, the figure stepped forward, revealing itself more clearly. It was massive, standing on two legs like a man, but covered in a dark, matted fur. The head was distinctly canine, with a long snout and ears that twitched in his direction. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, and it seemed to be studying him with a predatory intensity. Mr. Johnson stood frozen, unable to move or to look away. The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Mr. Johnson described feeling a primal fear, unlike anything he'd ever experienced before. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature melted back into the forest shadows, leaving him trembling and questioning his sanity. Mr. Johnson told me that night he couldn't sleep, and I noticed that in the following days he was visibly nervous and avoided the woods entirely. Another neighbor's son, named Timmy, had his own chilling encounter. One late afternoon, Timmy was playing near the edge of the woods when he saw what he first thought was a tall shadow cast by the setting sun. As he watched, though, the shadow seemed to detach from the trees and take on a more defined shape. Standing there, perfectly still, was a figure with the body of a man, but the head of a wolf. The eyes, glowing a sickly yellow, were fixed on Timmy. He described how the creature's eyes seemed to bore into him, making him feel nauseous, and as if he needed to go to the bathroom immediately. Terrified, Timmy turned and ran home as fast as his legs could carry him, leaving his toys scattered behind. As the weeks passed, these sightings became more frequent and more alarming. Almost every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the dark figures would emerge from the woods. They no longer clung to the shadows, but walked around brazenly, as if assuming no one would dare challenge their presence. These creatures, with their fur-covered bodies and long dog-like snouts, seemed to be a twisted blend of human and beast. Their howls, echoing through the night, were unlike any animal I had ever heard. Deep, guttural, and filled with an unsettling intelligence. My curiosity got the better of me and I began researching these creatures online. I found stories and legends of the dogman, a creature said to haunt the forests of the Midwest. Descriptions matched what we'd seen. Upright walking, humanoid canines, with glowing eyes and a feral nature. The dogman was often portrayed as elusive and rare, but it seemed that here, in our little town, they were becoming a real problem. The dogman legend seems to date back to at least the early 1800s, with sightings reported by early settlers and Native Americans. Stories described a large wolf-like creature that could stand on two legs, roaming the forest and occasionally terrifying those who ventured too close. Some tales spoke of the dogman as a guardian of the woods, while others described it as an evil entity. Over the years, sightings became more sporadic, often dismissed as folklore or misidentified wildlife, but the descriptions we found online matched our experiences. Tall, fur-covered creatures with glowing eyes and a sinister presence. It was both fascinating and horrifying to realize we might be dealing with something out of legend. One evening, my neighbor Mrs. Anderson shared her own terrifying encounter with me. She'd been out in her garden at dusk when she had the fortune or misfortune of seeing one of the creatures up close. She described it in detail. Nearly 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with a wolf-like head and long muscular limbs. It had stood there, watching her, with those glowing eyes, before disappearing back into the woods. Her description sent chills through me. It matched my own experience nearly exactly. My most frightening encounter happened just a few nights ago. I went out to the barn getting ready to lock up for the night, when I heard something moving behind me. Turning, I saw one of the dogmen standing in the open doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. It was massive, easily towering over me, with long clawed hands that flexed, as if ready to pounce. I froze, too terrified to move, as it watched me, with those eerie, glowing eyes. In a sudden, almost casual motion, it reached down and grabbed a handful of dust from the barn floor, throwing it into the air in front of me. The dust cloud obscured my vision, and by the time I blinked it away, the creature was gone. It had slipped out the back door with a speed and stealth that left me shaken. I stumbled back into my house, locking the doors and windows, my heart racing. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge, and I kept a wary eye on the windows, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back in at me. As days passed, these sightings grew more frequent and more disturbing. One night, I was closing the drapes in my living room when I saw a dogman standing right outside the window, its snout pressed up against the glass, drooling and fogging up the pane. I screamed and bolted upstairs, but the image of those piercing eyes and snarling mouth haunt me to this day. The townspeople, although still largely in denial, have become increasingly fearful. No one wants to admit publicly that we have a dogman problem. It sounds too ridiculous, too far-fetched. But privately, I'm telling you, we're all taking precautions. People are keeping their children and pets indoors after dark, and some are even setting up cameras and traps in an attempt to catch the creatures on film. So far, none of these efforts have been successful. The dogmen remain elusive, appearing only in fleeting glimpses and disappearing just as quickly. We've started having informal gatherings to discuss the sightings and share any new information with each other. There's an awful lot of fear and uncertainty, but also a sense of community growing as we try to protect each other from harm. Some of the men have formed a patrol, walking the perimeter of the town at night, armed with whatever weapons they can find. It isn't much, but gives us a little comfort knowing they're out there watching. Two of our elderly neighbors, the Simmons and old Mr. Blake, have also reported sightings. Mr. Simmons saw one of the creatures standing in his backyard early one morning, watching him as he fetched his newspaper. He described the same terrifying features: upright stance, glowing eyes, long teeth. Mr. Blake, on the other hand, heard their howls echoing through the night and found large clawed footprints in his garden the next morning. The prints were deep, indicating a creature of significant weight. Mr. Blake took photos of the tracks, and they looked unlike any animal prints I'd ever seen before. Larger, and more terrifying. The increased number of sightings, combined with the fear spreading through our town, has me deeply worried for my family's safety. I've begun to seriously consider moving away, leaving behind the home and the community that I've known all my life. It breaks my heart to think of abandoning everything, but the thought of staying and facing these creatures is starting to become unbearable. I've looked into potential new places to live, though the idea of uprooting our lives is daunting. There's a lot to consider: finding a new home, settling into a different community, and the financial strain of moving in 2024. But the safety of my family has to come first. I've started making plans, though a part of me is still reluctant to leave this place that I've called home for so long. I never thought I'd be writing a letter like this, but I feel it's important to share my experience. The dogman is no longer just a legend or a scary story to me. It's a very real threat here in our town. I hope my account helps others to be more aware and prepared, and maybe even spur some action or advice on how to deal with these terrifying creatures. Because none of us here have any idea how to deal with the werewolf infestation in our town. We have one more story with the exact same title as that one coming up right after this.
Find that link in the description, honey.
Werewolf Infestation in our town. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I'm writing to share a bizarre and frightening situation that's unfolding in my town. Before I get into the details, let me clarify a few things about myself. My pronouns are generally they, them, but I also use she, her on days when I feel like presenting more feminine. I'm someone who prides themselves on being open-minded and accepting of all cultures and backgrounds. This is important for you to know because the story I'm about to tell might make me sound like a bit of a bigot against werewolves. Yes, you heard that right. Werewolves. I live in a small, close-knit Midwestern farming town. Growing up here, I felt a deep sense of belonging. As a young boy, the community embraced me warmly. After grad school, when I returned as a gender-fluid person married to a woman, we were welcomed with open arms. This town, though conservative in its roots, has a surprising capacity for acceptance and love. Recently, the town has seen an influx of new families from diverse cultural backgrounds. The older generation, who had held the same farms and homesteads for decades, has begun to pass away, and their properties are being sold one by one. 5 homesteads have already changed hands, and 2 more are being developed into multiple housing units. Each new arrival brings with them rich traditions and experiences from major world cities. My wife and I were delighted at the chance to interact with such a diverse and worldly group of people. However, things took a strange turn when we started noticing odd behaviors among our new neighbors. Initially, I was thrilled to have conversations about world affairs, history, culture, but soon unsettling events began to unfold. One night, while walking back home from the store, I glanced through the window of our Eastern European neighbors and I saw something that froze me in my tracks. In their living room, there was a creature. A large, upright, wolf-like creature moving about the room as though he owned the place. At first I thought it must be a trick of the light or maybe even someone in a costume, but the way it moved, fluid and natural, suggested otherwise. I stood there rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature turned its head toward the window and our eyes met. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and for a moment I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if I were looking into the eyes of something ancient and evil. I quickly ducked and ran the rest of the way home, my groceries forgotten in the panic. That night, besides going to bed hungry, I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes watching me. My wife, sensing my distress, asked what happened. I told her about what I had seen, but she dismissed it as a stress-induced hallucination, pointing out that I had been working long hours recently. I tried to accept her rational explanation, but the image of that creature haunted me in my dreams for nights afterward. Over the next few weeks, more strange things began to happen. Our South American neighbors, who had moved in a month ago, hosted a lively celebration one evening. Curious, I peeked through their back fence. Among the vibrant decorations and cheerful music, I saw several figures with glowing eyes, dancing around the bonfire. They were chanting in a language I did not recognize, and as I watched, one of them began to transform. Fur sprouted from their skin. Their bones appeared to elongate, and within moments, a snarling wolf-like creature stood where a person had once been. I stumbled back in shock, tripping over my own feet as I tried to comprehend what I had just witnessed. A note appeared on our door the next day. It accused me of spying and xenophobia, claiming I was spreading rumors about the new families being werewolves. It was signed by a different new neighbor, but it clearly reflected the sentiments of several of them. Well, I was mortified. Here I was trying to understand and fit in with these fascinating new neighbors, and suddenly I was the one being accused of bigotry. The note read, "We heard what you've been saying about us. You need to understand that just because our customs are different, it doesn't mean we're monsters. Your fear and your ignorance are showing. Please stop spreading lies about our families." Well, I felt terrible. Was I really being paranoid and judgmental? I had always considered myself to be open-minded and fair. This forced me to reflect deeply on my actions and attitudes. Yet I couldn't ignore the fear that gripped me every time I saw those glowing eyes. The new Asian family, whose background included ancient legends of shapeshifters, added to my fears. They were reserved and kept mostly to themselves. But one evening, while passing their house, I heard low growls coming from inside. I started shivering all over uncontrollably. I glanced through a small gap in their curtains and I saw several wolf-like creatures prowling around their living room, moving with an eerie coordination. They turned their heads simultaneously toward the window, their eyes glowing. I felt like I was suffocating under their gaze. Panicked, I ran home. The image of those creatures burned into my mind. Our pet cat, whom we had planned to bring over from our previous home, ended up moving in with a friend. I couldn't bear the thought of what might happen to her in a town where werewolves prowl the night. The disappearance of other neighbors' pets have only heightened my anxiety. Several cats and dogs have gone missing recently, and each incident coincides with the night of the full moon, and strange noises coming from the houses of our new neighbors. Yet I don't want to accuse them of anything and be accused of being a bigot. At night our town was no longer the quiet, serene place that I had known my entire life. Howls and growls and screams punctuated the darkness, and large unusual footprints appeared nightly around our property. One night I found myself unable to sleep, and I ventured outside with a flashlight. The light revealed large clawed tracks in the soft earth near our garden. I quickly took photos with a ruler next to them for scale, and I showed them to my first boyfriend, who's now a veterinarian. He scrutinized the images and said, "These look like dog tracks, but no dog leaves prints this large." Then he asked me how I faked the photo and accused me of using Photoshop. His skepticism left me feeling more isolated and desperate than before. I was really needing answers, and I confronted one of our neighbors, a member of the Eastern European family. I tried to carefully phrase my questions, trying not to sound, accusatory. They responded with vague, cryptic answers, evading my direct inquiries about the strange occurrences. They insisted that their family traditions involved deep respect for nature and ancient rituals, but they denied any connection to the supernatural events that I described, or the animal disappearances. The next day at the grocery store, I noticed several townsfolk giving me dirty looks. Whispers followed me through the aisles, and I felt the sting of judgment from people, some of whom I had known for years. It seemed that word of my suspicions had spread, and now I was the one under scrutiny. I felt a deep sense of shame and regret. How had I gone from being a respected member of the community to someone accused of bigotry, and against werewolves no less? My wife confronted me later that evening, asking me, "Are you really spreading these rumors about our neighbors?" Her voice was tinged with disappointment. "This isn't like you," she said. "We've always prided ourselves on being accepting and fair. What the heck's gotten into you?" I tried to explain my fears and the things that I had seen, but she remained unconvinced. "You're letting your imagination run wild," she said. "These are good people just the same as us. They're new and they're different, yes, but aren't we new and different to others sometimes too? It doesn't make them monsters." Her words stung, and I felt a pang of guilt. Was I letting my fear of the unknown turn me into the very thing I despised? Someone who judged others based on their differences. Yet the terrifying encounters and the mysterious disappearances were just too real to ignore. Despite the mounting evidence and the growing fear in my heart, I have resolved to stay in our town. Moving away isn't an option. This place is our home, and I couldn't abandon it so easily. Instead, I've decided to confront my fears and try to understand our new neighbors, werewolves or not. I'm trying to convince myself that my fears are fueled by ignorance and misunderstanding. Yes, there are strange and frightening things about these people. Yes, the animals in the neighborhood are disappearing, but they are still people. Living among potential werewolves has been a journey of fear, regret, and I hope someday acceptance. I still hear the howls at night, and the footprints still appear, but I tell myself it would be bigoted to be afraid, and then I push my fear deep down inside me. Instead of judging werewolves as monsters, I'm learning to embrace the diversity that makes our town unique, even if it comes with a touch of the supernatural and an increased level of danger. Because I have no right to judge. The werewolf infestation in our town. Well, I'm from New York, not from Boston. Our executive producer is named Austin. Please welcome new channel member Austin Perstupa, who recently joined our PayPal subscribers club and made this episode possible. Austin got to see our 2 new uncensored Dogman stories available to members only. If you'd like to see them as well, then listen to what our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.